Oh, we can start. And we're going to continue the life of Rabbi Akiva. This is where we are. Right? We've been studying about this great figure of Judaism and the great innovator. And we talked about him being like Moses and how the Midrash was saying, well, why didn't the Torah was given to Rabbi Akiva? Because he was so smart, he could interpret every single ground. And then we talked about his early beginnings, and he came from not knowing anything, but then slowly he learned, he studied. Anybody have any leftover thoughts about from last week or any comments? We are going to continue, and today we're going to be looking more at some of the spiritual life of Rabbi Akiva, some of the inner part of his life. So we are going to turn all the way to number 161.
60.
Yeah, the Midrash number 161.
160.
Ready.
161. Yep. Okay. And so we've talked about his greatness. We've talked about his intellectual ability, and how his curiosity. I think the last Midrash that we read was about how do you move a mountain? It's impossible to move a mountain. But he did it one little rock at a time, right? He took a big rock and made it go down the hill. He took another big rock and made it go down the hill. And so his resilience. So let's turn to the story number 161 about him. Who would like to read?
No one ever volunteered. We have been taught that according to Rabbi Judah, such was the practice of Rabbi Akiva. When he prayed with a congregation, he used to make his prayer brief and conclude the service in order not to inconvenience the congregation. But when he prayed by himself, a man would leave him praying in one corner and find him later still praying in another corner because of his many genuflections and prostrations. Interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Yes, it's funny.
What do you get out of it?
I've never seen genuflection applied to Judaism. I've always seen it applied to Catholicism. So I guess that's why I laughed. But also just the idea that he's contorting himself from one corner to another is amusing.
Yeah. Well, but the interesting thing about that kind of prayer, it's whole body prayer, right?
True that.
So he's thinking and feeling with his whole body. Nothing is sort of out of bounds. Every part of his body feels something, which is an interesting thought.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
And he's so into it that he's not quite aware of where he is, right? He's
Moving around,
the
yeah.
impression, he's just moving around, and it makes you wish you were flying in a room to see what it actually looked like to see him pray in that way. But it was probably pretty intense. But what do you think of the first part of that he would not want to make his prayer brief?
Inconvenience the congregation.
He's very considerate.
Considering humble man,
Yeah.
right? And then he realized his own prayer was maybe not everybody would wanted to pray for hours, because they would leave him, right? And he would go and he'd go about their day and he'd come back and he's still praying. He's in a different corner.
He was praying for everybody, not just for himself.
Beautiful. He's praying for
And
everybody.
like when we bow during
Yes.
certain prayers,
Yes.
I mean, we don't call it genuflecting, but it's just, maybe this is just their interpretation of it.
Well, the truth is that Jews used to do a full prostration for the Amidah. So we now bow, but Jews used to go completely on the ground for each one.
Like you do with the High
I did
Holiday.
a high holiday. So why did we stop? Because then the Muslims came and they started doing it, so we didn't want to do the same as them. But we used to do a full prostration. Or whenever we bow now, we used to go down on the ground.
Yeah.
So
okay.
it's But,
Thank goodness we don't do that.
that's,
You have people not getting.
yes, exactly, right. So it makes it a little bit easier to bow. But you see over millennia how the bows become smaller and smaller, right? It starts with full prostration, and now
It's a
sometimes
little.
it's a little sometimes. But you see this kind of there's the separation between, okay, here he is, this very devout person and putting his whole being into it and piety, but he doesn't expect that of everybody. He wants to be considerate and thoughtful of other people and not force his way on other people. And humble, right? So actually, let's read the one above, because the one above is actually is also one that I enjoy.
160.
160, yeah.
It happened that the synagogue sexton publicly asked Rabbi Akiva to step over to the lectern to read the Torah lesson, but Rabbi Akiva did not rise. After they left the synagogue, he began to apologize to the disciples, saying, "May such and such befall me if it was out of arrogance that I did not rise to read in the Torah." So they asked, "And why did not the master rise?" He replied, "Because I had not prepared myself." The disciples fell to wondering about what Rabbi Akiva had said. Does he mean not prepared himself to know what he was reading, or he wasn't prepared just to be asked to do it?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
It's hard to know, but it's
Because I think about Charles, every week. I kid him always saying, you probably know the whole Torah by heart by now after 30 years of doing it.
yeah.
And I'm sure Rabbi Akiva could read it.
But maybe
He
He
just
was-
wasn't prepared for the event.
he wasn't
I think.
prepared, or he wasn't, and
Devarim.
but
Prepared
it's
to give
nice that he's so transparent, right? He's very humble about how he talks
Yeah,
about it,
yeah.
right? He doesn't say blah, 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 and want to storm off, right? But
Right.
he kind of, he apologizes to his disciple and says, "I'm sorry, I wasn't able to."
To do
And
it.
so why did you do it? But it's a humble kind of leader, right? Even though they're all surprised because you can't just do it. So it's the question is also, was he reading from the Torah? Or was he supposed to just kind of give a little Dvar Torah on the Torah? It's hard to know exactly what it was, but either way, he didn't feel prepared and he didn't stand up. He was very, very human, something very human about both of these stories, right? That despite his greatness, he wasn't projecting his ego in a certain way. And the truth is that that little story about how he made the prayer brief for his students, that becomes something that's actually gets codified into Jewish law, which is that when you pray, when you lead the service for the congregation, if you're the leader, don't make it go on for too long. You have to think of just from this little story, you should think about the well-being of the other people in the minyan and think about who you're praying with. And it's a side of Judaism that's it's considerate, right? That tries to not be, I remember myself once when I was in rabbinical school, and I like to pray a little bit longer and do long. Certain point, one day, one of the deans came over to me and said, "Hey,
Knock it off.
he said, I had to get to my office this morning to do so and so, and it was like 5 minutes longer, but I took it, and it was true, and then so whenever sometimes you have to, there's, I grew, there's some communities where people do go on, and it's okay, because that's just what's expected.
Yeah.
But in the morning minyan where people work, you can't do that because people have to get to work. They have to leave to get to work. So even in our morning minyan, there are a few people, there's one who go a little bit longer, but it's where everybody's pretty much retired, but there are a few people who work, and I'm sometimes try motion a little bit. You have to be considerate of the other people because they have to get to work, and they've timed their morning to think, okay, I've got enough time for breakfast and I'm gonna go to work, and if you take an extra 10 minutes to lead the service, that's an inconvenience. And there's also, you do your best to keep things on time. So it's and it comes. This is a little
This is where it
story.
comes
This it
from.
comes from.
Yeah.
It's cute. If you want to go longer, then that's fine. But that's not the custom of your place. And so we have this very strong idea of the custom of the place. And so every little shul has its own custom, right? You stand or sit for the Shema, or what do you do for different parts? Different stand and sit for different parts. And so that
You hold your hand.
you put your hand, yeah. So every place has its little, there, it says, we have exact ordinances of how to do every single little thing, but sometimes the custom of each place differs, and that's okay. But now we're gonna get to maybe a very rich story, 162. Do you want to read another one, or would you like to hand it off?
Yeah, I can read one more.
Okay, 162.
Our masters taught. 4 men entered the garden, namely Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Ahir, and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva said to them, when you arrive at the slabs of pure transparent marble, do not say water, water.
I'll just stop for a second. What's the garden? This is some kind of mystical experience they're having.
The garden. So it's not a real garden.
It's not a real garden. It's a mystical realm.
For it is said, he that speaketh falsehood shall not be established before mine eyes. Ben Azai cast a look and died. Of him scripture says, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. Ben Zoma looked and became demented. Of him scripture says, hast thou found honey? Eat so much as is sufficient for thee, lest thou be filled therewith with vomited. Ahir mutilated the shoots. Rabbi Akiva departed unhurt. So they were looking at something that wasn't there, but they were imagining it, right?
Well, they were having some kind of mystical experience that was so powerful. And he's the only one who came out of it
Alive.
in good. And these were all famous rabbis intact. So
But he warned them.
He warned them. He said, be careful, right? When you're in this kind of mystical thing. And so acher, what does it mean that he mutilated the shoots? Acher means other. And he was a famous rabbi, Elisha ben Abuya of his time, and he became a heretic. And they say this is the experience made him a heretic. Somehow he came. The book As a Driven Leaf is about him. I don't know if anyone ever heard of that book or read it. That's an interesting book. But anyhow, so one of them just died on the spot. He took a look and died in ecstasy. The other one looked and became demented. And there's this verse that says, if you eat too much honey, it might
Make you
throw up. And then Acher made him a heretic. He stopped believing in God, and he became totally part of the Hellenic culture that he grew up in. So he became Greek and philosopher, and he completely gave up in Judaism. And so he was a great rabbi, and whenever they saw him, they would try and not talk to him anymore. He was excommunicated, basically. And there's 2 events where he became a heretic. One was this one, and the other was there's an expression in the Torah, there was a mitzvah where if you shoo away the mother bird, so as to, if there's a mother bird and a little baby, and you shoo away the mother bird, so the mother bird can't see that you've taken the egg or the baby to eat it, you shall have a long life. And you saw somebody climb a ladder, we might say a story, climb a long ladder up a tree to do that, shoot away the mother bird, and he fell off the ladder and died. So he said, well, how could it be true? How could this be true if it says in the Torah? So he said, between that and this event, Acher, Elisha ben Abuya, became a heretic and stopped believing in God.
But they're doing something not so nice, right?
I agree. It's a very strange.
Yeah,
the whole thing is
very strange.
Were these were forbidden? Is that what they were doing, something that was forbidden?
Well, they were doing something that was dangerous. They were accessing the mystical realm, and it seems like none of them were quite prepared for that encounter. And Rabbi Akiva, the way the story portrays it, he had some more mystical experience or sense of what was about to happen, and we don't know exactly what happened. But part of this story has been used in many ways, but one is it's very much a story that's been used as a warning. And right before the rabbis, the prophets had all kinds of mystical experiences, right? And the prophets were fine. We have stories in the Bible of people having experiences and things happening to them. So this story has been a little bit about people lost some of their sense of being able to be connected to God. And then from now on, right after the destruction of a temple, you have to be more careful in how you access the mystical stuff and the meditation. So the way, what does it mean? The pure transparent marble, do not say water. This is a complicated thing. But according at least to the Kabbalah, that they were engaged in some kind of meditation. They were visualizing Yud He Vav He, right? Whoever comes to my meditation on Sunday knows that's what we do. We visualize it. So they were visualizing Yud He Vav He, I'm not sure this is exactly what he meant, but what the Zohar thinks he meant is water, right? We have this idea of the upper waters and the lower waters, but don't say it twice. Don't think that there's separation within God. Think that there's only unity in God. As in, don't think that even though you experience something and you experience something that feels like separation. I'm not sure that's exactly what's happening here, but that's the way the Zohar interprets it. But something happened where they weren't prepared, and the power of that experience, maybe Rabbi Akiva was leading them and they just weren't ready, but somehow some event happened, right? They were all four of them started to meditate together and they had some big experience, and only one person came out of it still okay, and that's Rabbi Akiva. So it's about the experience it's about the greatness of Rabbi Akiva, and to some degree, and he was not only an intellectual genius, but he was also a spiritual master in his own way.
And maybe it goes back to that 160 I read that said, because I had not prepared myself, maybe these people weren't prepared for
Right.
what the experience was going to be.
Yeah, they weren't prepared. So another way of looking at this. So they said the garden in Hebrew is called Pardes, and in the way we understand it, Pardes stands for the four different letters. It corresponds to the four different letters of interpreting Torah. Like there's four different ways. You can either interpret just the plain meaning, or you can interpret Pardes as pshat, or the plain meaning. You can interpret remez, which are the hints in the Torah, or you can interpret the drash, the midrash, or the last level is sod, or the secrets. So they tried to interpret the secrets in the Torah, and they got zapped. But we know there are other stories of people getting zapped for going too far into
So
it.
you're not supposed to do that.
Well, don't do it unless you're prepared, or you have someone. You don't want to get into. Once you start interpreting these realms, you could become a heretic, or you could go off the deep end, or you could die. So you can imagine the later mystics have a lot of fun with this story. That's why they say, right, Kabbalah, you have to be 40 years old and a man and married to be studying it. So, but the truth is that most of the Greek Kabbalists were under 40 when they started, and women who have studied too. So this is a little bit of intense stuff. I know, David, you've been unusually silent through all of this.
Well, if you want me to comment on that, I'd be glad to. There's a couple of things in this. First of all, as you get closer, supposedly, to the divinity, as you get into the suprasensory realm, as the realm that you get into doesn't involve sensation, vision, etc. anymore, and just involves a pure intellectual experience, if you bring sensation to it, you've in fact, there's lots of rules about this, and it has to do with idols. So if you bring sensation to a suprasensory experience, that's a no-no. So you don't necessarily get punished for that, but you miss out on the real thing. Now, even if you bring the logic of sensation to that experience. Like, for example, mathematical structure or dialectical structure to that experience, it also ruins the experience. You have to get yourself ready to not know anything about the experience. Now, Rabbi Akiva was apparently ready for this. So when he was having this experience, he knew that he didn't know anything about it and was not going to impute the experience to anything, was not going to stick his sensation on it, was not going to put any words on it, was not going to put any structure that comes from sensation on it. So he was fine. And all these other guys sort of failed at this.
Very nice.
That's hard to do. That's hard
Yeah,
to
very tough.
disengage.
In
your
other words, you have to
schema
keep
and
your mouth shut.
experience.
You have to keep your internal mouth shut. Okay, so you can't be talking.
Jews,
What?
Jews have to do this.
Right, it's
Well,
very tough. It's very tough. You've got to get your attention focused on this experience and not comment on it. Now, once you come back down, you go up or something comes down to you, but once you come back down, then you can fiddle with it in your mind. But the whole idea is this is suprasensory, which means mystical. We call suprasensory things mystical. And suprasensory things have to stay in the realm of the suprasensory. And you don't bring sensation up to that realm, because what you're going to do then is you're going to diminish it.
And it's also, I mean, I think that's all, I love the way you said that, and the way I interpret it also is the pure transparent marble is some kind of experience like of light or some kind of inner experience of coming to a place. And then that I like that when you come to that, don't start to try and think, oh, this is what this is, or this is water, and you have to just be in it. And that's meditation. Meditation is just being in it. And in general, in meditation is the second your mind starts to like, oh, you're no longer in it. And this could be going to this place, and the pure transparent marble is
it's the sapphire stone that people talk about.
I was about to say, it's what the sapphire.
And sapphire stone, Maimonides spends a lot of time on the sapphire stone, the guide for the perplexed. But sapphire stone is the same as the throne of the divinity. So the sapphire stone, the pure marble, you're closer, supposedly closer to the divinity. And because closeness to the divinity is a supersensory closeness, okay? It's not a sensational closeness.
You're not really seeing marble, but you're trying to interpret some kind of spiritual sense with what you know. So you call it sapphire, you call it marble or light, or
Right.
And so you're in some mystical place. So he said to them, you're going to come to when you come to that mystical place, if you rise to that mystical place, don't start. So there they were with their Jewish minds, water, and one of them, his mind just spiraled out of control, and he became a heretic. The other one's mind spiraled out of control, he lost it, and the other one died, which, I mean, it must have been a very powerful experience for this to happen. I mean,
the thing is, they didn't attend mystical classes properly, because in those days, they had classes for doing this kind of thing, or classes to become a rabbi, classes to become a messiah, and a lot of up-and-comers, young guys who are up-and-comers, attended these classes and knew how to behave when they would have these experiences. So these guys must have missed the class or two.
Yeah.
So we have this idea,
Wait. That's a joke, right?
Well, what we'll say is we had this idea of schools of prophets.
Yeah.
Right.
We had this idea there were schools of prophets, because we think this is the Kabbalistic interpretation, but we think of prophets as people who just one day God started talking to them, and then they became prophets, and they spent the rest of their lives hearing God's voice and relaying them. But we have this whole tradition that there were schools of prophets where you prepared yourself. Maybe it happened to some people, but you had to go through years of preparation. I mean, we have this in our general culture, right? In all kinds of traditions, right? The Zen Buddhists and the this and the that, and all these mystical, you go through years learning with a master. And so we have this idea of you have to prepare yourself. I mean, you have to prepare yourself for a big experience, especially.
Except today, if you tell someone God's talking to you, they'll say you're crazy.
So that's why you don't,
Schizophrenic.
that's why you don't tell.
That's why you
them.
don't tell
You
anybody
don't
about
say
that.
it,
You keep
no.
your mouth shut.
That's right.
But it's the same way, so we have our meditation every Sunday, and you're going through this meditation, but someone, as part of this meditation, we talk about going into the Ein Sof, the without end. And somebody at our group once asked me, well, is this, is this preparation for passing away? And I said, well, it's not completely not true. There is some truth to that. So as you're meditating, you're going through this, it's something very serious going on, on some level, and you're training yourself, you're training your spirit to have these experiences, you're training yourself inwardly. And to really do it, you go through many years and decades, how you live. I mean, living well, being a good person, building your vessel. The more you meditate, the more you do this, the more you're building your capacity for bigger and bigger experience. Because if you just go from one day walking around normal consciousness to having a very big experience, it can be too much. But it is a disturbing story, because you would think that just living rabbinic Judaism, they would have at least some preparation. But we see Rabbi Akiva had a very alive prayer life, so he definitely had some kind of inner experience. But this, in my mind, I find this story disturbing, because why really these guys couldn't handle this, or what is it? What exactly? I've always found this story disturbing, that they didn't have some training in it. Only Rabbi Akiva had some training in this, or maybe the experience was so powerful for whatever reason we can't completely understand. But what was the spiritual condition of the people at that moment? Even these people who were leaders weren't able to deal with it. But it's
that particular path of the supersensory path through meditation, through getting close to God, is somewhat dangerous, obviously. And when I was much younger, in another life, when I used to do work as a psychiatrist in mental hospitals, I saw many people who had embarked on that path when they were too young, when they didn't have any sort of connections to the world. They didn't have a wife who was nagging them. They didn't have a mortgage on their house, and they didn't have children. And that actually is a required thing to be able to do this. And they went mad, okay? So what happened is they opened up very quickly from the sensory realm to the supersensory realm. And if that happens to you, now think about that. So you're used to walking around the world where everything makes sense to you. We use the word makes sense because it comes through sensation. So everything is a sensory object that you see. And then all of a sudden, and you haven't really prepared for this, you get a non-sensory entity, a non-sensory, whatever it might be. So what's going to happen is your mind is going to protect against this, and it's going to name this thing. And because it startles you, because it frightens you, it's going to name it into something very negative. It's going to feel like some other planet is entering your head, and it's some sort of paranoid delusion or something like that. And that's very common.
There's a whole hospital outside Jerusalem for this. It's for people who have Jerusalem syndrome, and they suddenly think that it's really, they think they're Mashiach, or they think that they're King David, or they think that they're but it's
David laughing.
Yeah. No, I think
You're serious.
I'm serious. No, but there's a whole but what's missing is also oversight, right? If you embark on this journey and you have a real teacher who knows what they're doing, who's overseeing you, then you've got a much better chance of not going crazy, because you have someone who's telling you, okay, you think you had this great experience, you think you're Mashiach, that was nothing, and come back and have your cup of tea, and kind of just Just live your life. So,
You cannot take this stuff too seriously. That's the other thing. So this kind of thing, if you take it too seriously, you're on the wrong track. It has to be done with somewhat of a sense of humor.
a sense of humor, and and either, you know, have a lot of stability in your life and a lot of guidance through books. But if you have a teacher,
Guide.
if you have a guide, the guide oversees you, and the guide has, you know, some spiritual ability to kind of help shut you down in some way, if you're getting, you know, to kind of calm you down, and to, you know, because people get a little riled up, and you know, I've seen it too, and it's not good. But they're rabbis, you know, and there should have been someone in their circle who could have been helpful to them. So but it's a very much a cautionary tale.
Right.
So let's go to 164, because I want to get to two other stories about him. But that was one of the great stories, right? The Pardes of the orchard, and about Rabbi Akiva as the one who not only intellectually empowered but spiritually empowered to do his work. So let's go to 164. Or someone else read, please.
It is said that Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 pairs of disciples between Gabath and Antipatris. All died during his lifetime at the same time between Passover and Pentecost Shavuot, because they did not treat one another with respect. The world was desolate until Rabbi Akiva came to our masters in the south and taught them Torah. He thus taught Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Judah, Rabbi Yosei, Rabbi Simeon, Rabbi Eliezer ben Shammua. He said to them, the previous disciples died only because they begrudged one another the knowledge of Torah. See to it that you do not act like them. They rose and filled all the land of Israel with Torah.
So this story actually applies to this time of year right now, because we're going up to Shavuot, and up until Lag BaOmer, which is a few days ago, there was a Jewish custom for the last month between Passover and Lag BaOmer. You can't have any weddings. So you'll notice you don't go to any traditional Jewish weddings during that whole month, because you're not allowed to, because of Rabbi Akiva's students who didn't treat each other well, so they all died, and so we're still 2,000 years later, we're mourning this thing that happened in this Midrash. And so what changed? So he went up north, that's what they did. So he went down south, and he got these great disciples, and they all treated each other correctly. It's a very intense story, right? What do you make of that? Like they hate, you know, they so begrudged each other that they all died.
They became very competitive. I think that's what he's talking about. They needed to show off in front of each other. They needed to assert power over each other by the knowledge that they had. And if you're going to study with other people, you have to yoke yourself to the end goal of the game and not be competitive. It's very difficult to do if you're if you're a youngster.
You know, if you, at this point, they were making study the center point of Judaism, right? If you're going to make study the center point of Judaism, you got to also warn people they've got to have some humility, right? And you know, that if it's all about ego and who's the biggest, the best thinker, the best this, and I mean, to this day, it's a huge issue. And I know, you know, in Israel, in those big yeshivas you hear all about, I'm not even talking about the ultra-Orthodox, but just the Orthodox yeshivas. And so I remember talking to, actually topical, but right there, Pardes, which is the name of that garden, is also the name of a yeshiva in Jerusalem.
What's it called?
Pardes.
Pardes.
It's where Rebecca Dempsey went to study,
Oh,
and I
okay.
went there too. It's one of the only egalitarian where men and women study together there. Anyhow, the head of that yeshiva, I was once talking to his son, and you know, he was a guy who grew up studying a lot of Torah. His father was an Orthodox rabbi, and he went to yeshiva age 18 and studied for 5 years. And he said there, you know, he thought that he had some skills. He said there were some guys in the yeshiva who slept like 4 hours a night. and they'd wake
Because
up
they
early,
studied,
because they
correct.
woke up early, like at 4 or 5 a.m. and they started to study. And they're studying all day long and they studying all night and then, and then they were just geniuses, and the more you study, the more you know. And so he said, I gave up at a certain point. Not he gave up studying, but he gave up competing with them. And he
Right.
just realized, okay, I'm not one of those people, for me, I just can't do that. But there were those
They could also
people,
become crazy too from
they'll
lack
also
of
become-
sleep and eating and
and
just
just
studying.
pushing your, they're all in competition, who can do the most
Yeah.
and all day long studying with each other. And that's kind of, we still live with that thing. And this is like another cautionary story a little bit of don't what's more important, and then you received the Torah is filled, the land is filled with Torah when you also get along and love each other and don't walk around thinking who's the best, which is easy to do when we're talking about intellectual knowledge, especially, but who knows the most, and there's always more to learn. And so here, actually, I want to go back to one other story quickly, and then we're going to go forward to the last story.
Is he coming back?
Which,
Trying to find that one. I'll look for it, but for now we'll go to the other story. Well, so let's go. This is maybe one of my favorite stories. If you listen to my sermon, you will have heard me towards this one a number of times. 166.
Reading it.
I tell a more elaborate version of this story, but
You embellish it.
I embellish it. So let's, which is an age-old tradition. 166. Who's reading?
Once while on a journey, Rabbi Akiva came to a certain place where he looked for lodging, but was not given any. He said, whatever the Holy One does is for the best. So he went off and spent the night in the open field. He had with him an ass, a cock, and a lamp. A lion came and ate the ass. A weasel came and ate the cock, and a gust of wind came and blew out the lamp. Again, he said, whatever the Holy One does is for the best. But that same night, troops came and took the people of that city into captivity. Said Rabbi Akiva to his disciples, did I not tell you, whatever the Holy One does is for the best?
Not so fun that the people got taken to captivity.
Yeah, right, but
But
he didn't.
he just went,
Made
he
his
rolled,
point.
he went and just lived with his place of faith. He's like, so it's a good thing he didn't have a lamp or a donkey or a rooster,
Cock
but
to alert.
to alert.
his
You know,
location. Yeah.
They would have caught him.
they would have caught him. So it's a whole part of the Torah, a whole part of the Talmud with a whole bunch of stories, which are both inspiring and hard to apply to real life in some ways, where it's some guy who says, well, whatever God does is for the best.
Well, it's
Whatever
Bishkir.
God has to say. Yeah, it's just meant to be, right? So and so Rabbi Akiva, he not only innovated, but he had 2 or 3 of these principles of kind of how to live religiously that became really important. And so this is a really hard one, right? Whatever God does to you is for the best, to live with that, because I mean, these are pretty bad things that happen, but it's much harder when it's even
Right.
more.
Right.
But so he comes and there's no lodging, he has to sleep in the field, and he's okay, well, whatever God does is for the best. And he has with him, not fun to lose your donkey and your rooster, I mean, I'm not sure why he's walking around for rooster. I can imagine why he's walking around with a donkey. I don't know why the rooster. And then he has this little oil lamp that goes out, and presumably it's cold or it's windy, and but in the end it works out. Anybody have any resistance to this way of being?
Well, it's interesting. Another guy who was into this was Descartes. You wouldn't think that, but Descartes also had a very radical view of things that happen. he understood what he could control and what he couldn't control. And what he couldn't control were everything that was outside of him, essentially in the sensory world. I mean, he was really radical about this. Obviously, you can pick things up, you can put things down, but once it starts to involve more variables and other people and other projects, you have really no control over it. So what he did is he never thought about it. He wasn't a big believer in the divine, although he certainly had that as a big part of his philosophy, but he let whatever happened happen, and understood that his sphere of control was extremely minimal and might include his own thinking, So he worked very, very hard to get in control of his own thinking. That was the thing that he was able to say that, yes, he was in control of. So, I mean, this also was a radical view of leaving control to some entity, some agency, or some divinity outside yourself.
But it's interesting because whenever one gets into these conversations, as you were alluding to, you get to, well, where's freedom of will, and if how do you so the Rabbi Akiva, one of the theologies in Judaism that he's the one who gave it its place, he says we both have God, everything is predestined, and we have complete freedom of will at the exact same time. And so he says somehow, the Talmud describes it differently. The Talmud says everything is predestined. The only thing that you decide is whether you have awe of God or not, whether you have awe of the divine at any moment. That is, your whole life, you just go about your life, everything you just say, this is the way it is. You don't really have the ability to choose. You think you do, but you don't. But all you can control is your inner state, right? That's what it's saying. All you can control is if in that moment you're connected to God or not, if you have awe of God or not, and the rest is as it is. I'm on some level, I don't subscribe to that. I personally think we do have a certain freedom of will, even though maybe God knows exactly everything that's going to happen, or the universe, because we are who we are and we're made as we're made, and so we're going to act as we're going to act, and all the different factors it's going to be. But I think our experiences, we do have free will, and the rabbis believed, right? At any moment you pick, your good side or your not so good side, and we all go through life, and we react to different moments. Every single moment, that's the way the rabbis viewed it, right? Either you go your good side or your not so good side, and so we go through that many times in a day, different levels of subtlety and of importance, but we have that. But it's one of the great, and most religious traditions have this idea of both things being predestined, right? And in the Eastern tradition, they believe you have your karma, you have to live out your karma. And so your karma is already, you're creating new karma for yourself, but you also have karma that's there. But karma is not like, okay, I kicked somebody when I was a kid, so somebody's going to kick me now. It's more like, well, I've developed this habit of being joyful, so that's who I am, or I've developed this habit of being this. So Rabbi Akiva, his other comment about this, and as we can see, he was a very deep thinker. He says, everything is written in the shopkeeper's book, right? The shopkeeper takes accounts for everything that happens and writes down the accounts, and the shopkeeper doesn't miss any of the accounts, and the book is always just. And so it's kind of saying that, the universe or God is keeping an account of everything that happens, because, and the way I understand it's not that God is, as I said, God is looking down and saying, okay, this so-and-so, you were bad to your neighbor, and so your neighbor isn't going to come and be bad to you. But I see it more organically, where if you develop a way of thinking negatively of neighbors, then you're not going to have a good relationship with your neighbors, because that's just who you are at that point. You've developed that habit. And so everything we do is part of who we become. We're always in the act of becoming, and we shift our thinking and everything. And, if you believe in reincarnation, which Kabbalah does, and you think it continues life after life, these habits, continue with one. So things happen to you, but what you can't control is what he does, which is saying what you can have this sense of giving it up for God, of, whatever happens is for the best. And there's a freedom that's found from living in that way, it's a very hard, you have to be very hard to live in this way that he's doing it, right? This is for
the giving it up for the God. It depends where you place the divinity that we're talking about. If the divinity is outside of you, distinct from you, completely different from you, has power over you the way a ruler has over you, which is the way children think of the divinity, then you're in more trouble with this. If the divinity is you to some degree, and is inside of you, and you have touch with it, which is in fact having the feelings that you have with it, it and you are not so separate. Now, who has that view who's Jewish? Martin Buber in I and Thou. Okay, that's his view, is the I and the thou is a singularity, which then somehow we split it up. But there's not so much difference from you and the divinity, according to Martin Buber. I happen to be rereading that book, and for the fifth time or so, and it's a very, very interesting book if you get the right translation, which is the Kaufman translation of it. So, the whole issue is where you place the divinity, okay? And where you place them, how you conceive of the divinity. If the divinity's up in the heavens, way distant from you, acting on you, then you worry about free will, you worry about all this stuff. If the divinity is somehow in you and a part of you, that's different.
Well, it's interesting because on one level, how these different ways of thinking about where is God within you or outside of you, can also be looked at not only as a search, okay, what is actually the truth, but it also can be looked at what works best for you in terms of your own path of living out these ideals. So for some people, the idea of having a God, without gives them something to focus on really powerfully and beautifully, and allows all of these other concepts of devotion and of this to exist. And that's what makes their spiritual life alive. And then and other people are more, if they think that, well, I'm not sure of how God exists as a separate entity and God's within me and the universe, we're all part of the same thing, that works better and allows them to live a spiritual life with more power. And I think, so we have different traditions within Judaism of how to look at that. And Judaism is a theistic religion overall, right? We believe in a God. So if you get to the mystical traditions, they'll say, well, God is to some degree within you, or there's many Kabbalahs, there's many different layers to God, so to speak, even though it's all one. In the end, doesn't matter. In the end, what matters is what makes your own, in my mind at least, what makes your soul alive and gives you a sense of feeling connected. And when you're doing that, you're doing the work, or if you're a sense of submission to either the God within or the God without, or to spirit, or however you want to say it, those are things that will enhance your spiritual life. And that's what's important. Not that, I mean, it's interesting to think about all of this, and it's important as well. But what gives each of us a sense of our inner lives being alive, that's why there's all these different paths, because each one of us has our own way to experience all of this, and each one of us has our own way to look at this. And that's what we say, there's 70 paths to Torah. That's like an infinity. Go ahead.
And the thing is nobody knows. Okay, nobody's got an absolute line on this, okay? And this is the same thing as these guys who got into the supersensory and thought they knew something, okay? So as we talk about where the divinity is located, we're in the same problem. Nobody knows. You got to say this in Yiddish with the word "gurnished" in it. But anyway, nobody knows anything about what we're talking about. There's no way in which we can get a truth value to this. First of all, because a truth value has to do with a subject separated from an object. So you're not about to be able to get something like that. You just have to live in the ambiguity of knowing that you don't know.
Well, the Gurnish is actually very good, because in some ways the only way to get to it is by saying nish.
Right.
Before you get,
Gornish.
once you get to nish, eventually you get to Gurnished, you're experiencing it. Or you could go the other way, where you could say, this is the Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, he says do and do. So do is you, right? So it's
Yeah.
you is God, and 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 there's a whole. So once you get to everything is or nothing is, then you get to a place where you're experiencing what it is, but you can't. But to talk about it is just an approximation, and since and so Rabbi Akiva, ostensibly from what we're talking about today, he got to that place and lived from that place, and that also gave him some of the ability to do what he was doing, which was reinterpreting every crown of the Torah, because he understood the essence of what it was all about, and that gave him the kind of inward knowledge to be able to do this work of reinterpreting Torah and reinterpreting the tradition to give it the wings it needed to survive exile, to survive destruction, and all of it. So I think we're going to stop here. It's a good place to stop. Next time we'll either read about the death of Rabbi Akiva, or we'll skip to somebody totally other. And just let people know, I'm not going to be here next week. I'm going on an unexpected trip to France Saturday to visit a very close childhood friend who's who's
Is he dying?
he may be. He's had stage 4 cancer for 5 years now, and so he just had a very hard.
Oh, that's nice. That
He
you
came
go.
back, so his morale is very low. So I'm going to.
So wait, we're not having class next Thursday. Yeah.
We're actually not going to have class
Okay,
on Thursday.
yeah,
I'll be
okay.
coming back on Thursday, so
Okay.
I'll be somewhere over the Atlantic next Thursday, coming back.
It's so
and-
good that you go to see him.
Yeah, I went once 5 years ago, and
Yeah, I
I thought I would
remember.
regret it if I didn't go this time,
Yeah,
because I'm not sure
right.
how much more time he has,
Yeah.
and he's
That's so.
very low. So, but I'll see everybody next week, unless we all get stuck somewhere staring at the apps.
Okay.
2 weeks on the 25th,
2 weeks.
on the 25th.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank
you,
Mark.
everybody.
Thanks
Thank
a
Thank
lot.
you, David, for elucidating us with all sorts of
All sorts of Michigan.
knowledge.
Yeah, Michigan for sure. Yeah.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you. Have a good week. Safe
Yeah.
travels, Rabbi.
Thank
Safe
you.
travels.
Yeah,
Safe
right.
travels.
Bye-bye.
How about for this?